Thank you, Angela. And as you presented, the aim of this session is to insist of how important it is to be able to share good data on biodiversity, because it helps support really global research and also decision-making processes, because it gives a wealth of information that is needed to take these decisions. So our session is centered around the Biodiversity Information for Development programs. It is a project that is funded by the EU and managed by the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, GBIF. And that really focus on the importance of sharing open data on biodiversity, and also to enable people to use that data. So with me, as you say, I'm the session moderator, and my name is Maeva, and I work at GBIF as well. And with me there is Tim Hirsch, the Deputy Director of the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, Laban Muzinguzi, who a research officer at Uganda National Fishery Institute. And unfortunately, our third speaker couldn't make it because of sickness. We should have had Benedictus FREEMAN, but luckily, Meliani was kind enough to join us instead. So Meliani is a senior program officer at GBIF and was extremely involved in the running of the BID program. So we would very like to hear from you as well. If you could use the chat to let us know who you are and where you come from, and what is your interest maybe with biodiversity and also biodiversity data. So we would really like to have that, if you could type that information in the chat. We also very like questions. So if you want to ask questions, so please use the Q&A box, and we will do our best to answer this question in between our speakers. And at the end of that session, there is a time associated for, dedicated for answering question and answer. And we would like to start that session with a poll. So if we could start the poll, please. And we would like to hear your opinion on the type of development priorities better access to biodiversity data could support. So we will have that poll open, and while you answer this poll, we would like to take the opportunity to show you a short video on what is BID and who are the people behind this. So if you could please show the video, thanks. Okay. So I hope that this short video gave you a glimpse of who are the people behind BID. behind the big concept. There's a lot of very exceptional people that help implement that project. If we can show the result of the poll now, it would be great. And then, actually, I won't comment on the result of the poll right now. I will let the I won't comment on the poll right now. I will let our first speaker comment the result of this poll. And our first speaker is Tim Hirsch, who will talk on why we should aim to develop capacity to share biodiversity data and what are these biodiversity data we're talking about. Over to you, Tim.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Maeva. So if we could get my presentation up, that would be great. I'm Tim Hirsch. I'm Deputy Director of GBIF, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And I'm going to spend the next few minutes giving an overall introduction on the approach that we've been taking as outlined by that video on building and developing capacity for both the mobilization and the use of biodiversity data through international and regional collaboration. If you go to the next slide, please. And I'm going to start with a bit of a puzzle. You'll see two maps there, which may look rather similar. If I tell you that one of those maps is to do with biodiversity data and the other one has nothing to do with biodiversity data, I'll just show it to you for just a few seconds so you can puzzle as to what they might show. But I will put you out of your suspense very quickly if we go to the next slide. And you'll see that, in fact, the top right map is Facebook friends and their connections. And the bottom left map is a representation of the data that GBIF brings together on occurrence of species around the world. And the take-home message from that is that these maps are really remarkably similar and demonstrate that where biodiversity data is concentrated is much more about where there are people and where there are connections, and much less about where the real diversity of the planet is. And what this emphasizes is the critical importance of collaborating to make sure that we fill those gaps and we have a much more even distribution of that evidence about biodiversity and species around the world. If we could go to the next slide, please, I'll just give a little bit of a quick overview of what GBIF is all about, Global Biodiversity Information Facility. So we are an international and intergovernmental collaborative network. We've been around for 20 years. And the aim of what we do is to enable anyone, anywhere to share and use biodiversity data in order to support research and decisions. And on the right, you'll see our flagship product, which is the global portal, the website, gbif.org, which you may be able to see through the numbers, brings together very large volumes of data. So we are giving access to more than 1.7 billion individual species occurrence records that are brought together from nearly 1,700 institutions around the world from over 120 countries. If we go to the next slide, please. This just gives an idea of what GBIF does as a global infrastructure. So essentially, what we're doing is bringing together very scattered and diverse forms of evidence. So evidence about where species have lived and when is contained, for example, in specimens from natural history collections, in observations, whether it be from citizen scientists or from monitoring for environmental impact assessments, from literature, both old and new, from remote sense technologies, including, for example, satellite tracking of animals, and increasingly evidence from that are contained in the DNA sequencing of the environment, or so-called DNA. And through the use of common standards and enabling people around the world and persuading them to use common information standards to share that data, we're able to bring that all together through a global platform and many national platforms, so that information and data can then be used both in research, but also in international processes, such as, for example, for IPBES and the Biodiversity Convention. If we go to the next slide, please. So just looking at the sort of thematic areas in which that information and data is used. And apologies, I'm not actually able to see the results of the poll to see how close you got to some of these ideas. But the point we wanted to make was that while, as expected, of course, this data and information is used to help in research and policy on conservation, it actually goes much more broadly across the spectrum of sustainable development. So for food security, climate change and human health, just as examples. If you go to the next slide, this just gives an idea of what the kind of questions that this data, when brought together, helps to answer. So, for example, with conservation, where are the most important areas to protect? With food security, where are the genetic resources that need to be conserved to sustain future nutrition? With climate change, how will climate change affect species distributions? Human health, where are the risk areas for outbreaks of zoonotic diseases? All of these are informed by what we would call primary biodiversity data. Next slide, please. So the BID approach, the approach of the Biodiversity Information for Development program, what we've been doing since this started in 2015 is to run a series of open calls for proposals for funded projects in 3 target regions: Sub-Saharan Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. And then through providing funding to projects that help to mobilize data, we bring these teams together. We build skills through training and mentoring across our community to develop communities of practice, which can then enable the sustainable data flows beyond the project periods and to set up international networks for data sharing and use. Next slide, please. So what has BID brought about in its first phase? Well, here are just some numbers that shows that with the investment we've put in so far, we've been able, for example, to mobilize more than 500 data sets from those 3 target regions. And you can see on the top right there, the map showing just the concentration of where those data sets have been located. Those data sets have come from 113 institutions sharing data from 47 countries in those 3 target regions. And together, those projects have generated more than 1.3 million individual species occurrence records. Even where some of these data sets may be relatively small, they all help to fill important gaps. And that next figure, 21,000 species registered for the first time in at least one country, shows that many species through these mobilized data sets are having evidence provided about their occurrence, which previously wasn't at least openly accessible, through sharing those skills and sharing those data sets. And the capacity part of it is also reflected by those last 3 numbers. So apart from the regional training workshops that we put together to help build the skills, which directly have trained 183 people across those 3 target regions. By building up those skills and training trainers, we've enabled 73 follow-on workshops across those regions, which combined have trained about 1,500 students. So I hope that's given a little bit of a flavor of what we're aiming to do there, and you'll hear more about that community of practice we've helped to establish in the following presentations. So thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Thank you, Tim. And while we are waiting for the result of the poll, I think it's quite fascinating to see how important a good access for this data is needed, because it's indeed the foundation of a lot of research, and also it can be used into many decision-making processes. And Laban presentation. Oh, I can see the result of the poll now. And yes, conserving species and ecosystems was the majority of the responses here. But as Tim showed in his presentation, is also biodiversity data can also be used in many other development priorities, such as food securities and human health even. So Laban, in his presentation, I believe you will give us a bit more concrete example on how these data that are being shared can be used. concretely. So without further ado, I leave the floor to Laban.
Thank you, Maheva, for the introduction. Once again, my name is Laban. I'm at the National Fisheries Resources Research Institute. As the slides come up, I'd like to let you know that I'm going to share an example showing that supporting local data hold institutions is an effective way to improve accessibility to data from countries with limited data available through the Global Biodiversity Information facility. Around 2017, we were asking ourselves questions on the freshwater biodiversity of our country, such as which water bodies have the highest number of threatened species. The questions appeared simple, but were not easy to answer. We learned that there were online platforms, such as the Map of Life, which could have the answers. This was not the case when we looked at them because the data was not there. For example, as you can see in this table, by April 2017, occurrences from Uganda for major freshwater taxa available in GBIF were few, only 5,000 for fish and 0 for zooplankton, which is also a major taxon in freshwaters. A useful lesson we learned also from this is that none of the occurrences in GBIF were coming from institutions within our country. Next slide. Then we asked ourselves, where was the data? The data was in inaccessible formats, in specimen collections, data files on shelves, and Excel data sheets scattered on computers of individuals. Next slide. We saw this as a problem because it meant that most policies in our country, beginning with the broader vision statement for the country, which promised to conserve freshwater biodiversity based on limited data and therefore ineffective. Next slide. This motivated us to move this motivated us to make more data available for effective conservation. And in late 2017, we obtained a small grant from GBIF for data mobilization and capacity building. And with this, we were able to publish 13,000 occurrences of fish species. But more importantly, the project helped us establish a team of 10 research staff at our institute with the skills and they were able to continue with making more data available. We have been able to make data mobilization a permanent part of our work. Next slide. The small grant also became a foundation for more funding from, for example, the GRS Biodiversity Foundation and the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences. Next slide. And from all these efforts, we have now published 26 datasets with over 48,000 occurrences, covering all the major taxa of freshwater in Uganda. Next slide. This data has been applied in reporting on biodiversity through the National State of Environment reports. It has been applied in development of a freshwater biodiversity portal for Uganda, and also in research. Now this portal that is based on this data helps us answer the previously difficult questions with ease. There are other ongoing applications of the data, including assessment of conservation status of species and prioritizing areas for conservation. Next slide. This work has enabled us to have engagements with data user institutions in the country to mainstream the use of all this data into policies, capacity building, and conservation research. Next slide. Our work is proof that it was a good idea for GBIF to support and increase capacity of data holder institutions in countries with limited data. And there's also a good lesson for institutions involved in these activities. They can become more effective by providing incentives for data mobilization teams and integrating the process of data mobilization with the generation of biodiversity information to directly support data user institutions with less capacity for manipulating data. I would like to thank the European Union for supporting the Biodiversity Information for Development program. I thank you.
And thank you very much to you, indeed, Laban. Extremely impressive achievements of your project and your activities in Uganda. And from what I can hear is that how crucial it is to support the institutions that already have the data to help them change the format so that they can be shared with a wider public, also to help their own country to answer some questions that were difficult to answer previously. And this led me to a topic that our third speaker, Meliani, has accepted to talk about and has very kindly accepted to answer some questions about how we enable people to share the data, how we develop capacity in that area. So welcome, Meliani, and very happy to have you here.
Thanks, Maeva. It's a pity that Ben wasn't able to join us today, but I think we can all join together and wish him a speedy recovery. And I'm very happy to be here and share some reflections on the work we've been doing on capacity development through the BID programme.
Likewise, very happy to have you here. And my very first question would be, one of the objectives of the BID programme is to support the development of capacity within the regions, and especially in Africa and the Caribbean, and in the Pacific. Could you elaborate on this?
Yeah, thank you. So as Tim was explaining in his presentation, GBIF's mission is global. So we're providing a global biodiversity data infrastructure. And while we've seen there are currently more than 1.7 billion species occurrence records that are freely available through GBIF, the data are not yet evenly spread, and there are significant gaps where we don't yet have sufficient data available. But these gaps don't necessarily mean that the data don't exist. Often the data have been generated, for example, field surveys, or they may be in museum collections through environmental impact assessments or citizen science or student research. But the issue is just that they're not accessible to be reused in support of further research or decision-making or policy. And so we're really aware that filling these data gaps requires outreach, engagement, and ongoing capacity development because of the breadth of actors that need to be involved in this work and the range of both technical and social skills that are needed. And I think Laban gave us a really clear example of this through his presentation, showing that the success that can be had when a project is able to build capacity to standardize and share data that are of immediate importance, in this case, to freshwater conservation in Uganda.
Thank you. And what is really concretely the approach that was implemented under BID to support the development of this regional capacity?
Right, so we recognised right from the beginning of the BID programme that we were going to need to involve the widest possible community of experts to help us to support the 63 project teams that were embarking on projects to mobilise biodiversity data for decision-making in Africa, Caribbean and Pacific. Most of these teams were completely new to this area, and the skills involved are both very technical, but they're also social skills. And so on the technical side, we reached out to experts from our network, and they helped us to design and carry out train the trainer workshops, as Tim showed. And these workshops were focused on the technical skills that involve things like how to standardize data, the informatics tools that are available for helping with data quality issues, how to publish your data online, but also how to use programs to analyze data to answer some questions that are of relevance to policy or research. But in addition to the technical skills, there are a lot of soft skills involved. So this can be things like, how do you build a network between all the holders and users of biodiversity data in your country? And how do you convince an institution that's hesitant to share data of the importance of openly sharing biodiversity and the benefits that this can bring? And so for these skills, what we noticed is that they are often dependent on context. So here, what we wanted to do is to develop regional communities of practice. So bring together people from across the project teams with volunteers from our broader community to share knowledge and experience as they went through their projects.
Community of practice, that is a very interesting concept. Could you maybe let us know how it works and more importantly, how it is successful?
Yes, thank you. I should start by saying I'm not a sociologist. I have a background as a zoologist, and I'm aware that communities of practice are a very specific concept that were described by sociologists Wegner and Trainer as groups of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. And I think this definition really resonated well with us, as it really reflects what we've been trying to do in building community through GBIF and this Biodiversity Information for Development program in particular. I think we're really fortunate that we have a very passionate community that's relatively easy to involve in things. They're really committed to open biodiversity data. But often what we find is that the individuals that work in this area might feel relatively alone within their institutions or even within their countries. And biodiversity informatics is still quite a new and developing field. And so people are typically really keen to connect with others and others that share the same interests and to share their experiences and learn from each other. So we decided that a good way to support the BID projects would be by facilitating ways for the community to get together and to make as many opportunities as we possibly could to get people actively involved in this work. And one of the ways this has been particularly successful, I think, is through engaging volunteer trainers and mentors. And what we mean by these mentors are experts from the community who have volunteered their time to support the project teams. So this is everything from answering questions to providing training in face-to-face and remote workshops. But often, and what I think is really important, is the informal one-on-one peer-to-peer support. And I think it's fair to say that mentoring has been really instrumental here in helping to narrow the knowledge gaps and allowing our BID programs to have a much bigger impact and reach.
Thank you. And my last question would be, how do you think we can make this whole concept of regional community of practice sustainable?
Well, that's a very good question. I think a real mark of the success of the approach is that we see now that many of the project participants that received mentoring in this way in the early part of the BID program are now the ones that are volunteering to provide support to the new projects that are kicking off as we go into the second phase. And Ben Freeman, if he had been here, would have been able to tell you about this firsthand, because this is very much his story. We also see this, though, concretely around the organisation of our recent online data mobilisation workshop for the projects in the Africa region. So when we organised this back in, I think it was 2017, for the first phase of projects, many of the trainers and mentors were from other regions, but the latest version of the workshop held this year, the majority of the trainers and the mentors were from the region and were previous project holders. So I consider that this community of practice is a really important outcome of the programme, and it will allow the sustainability of what we're doing. But we do need to keep facilitating the networking and engagement opportunities, and these can both be at the regional level and also at the global level. But I would really like you to hear this from some of the mentors directly. And for this, I'd like to show a short video that we prepared with some of the volunteer mentors, sharing their views on the community of practice that's dedicated to biodiversity information for development. So if we could see the video now, please.
The BID capacity enhancement model is a great training tool to help people like me who aren't too familiar with biodiversity data mobilization and training to plan, take the first steps, because the model teaches you what to expect all the way to the output stage. So my background is, I'm a marine biologist. So this was a really new thing to me, and it developed my own capacity to look after my own collections.
I'd say the broader network of the BID program is pretty amazing. We have a wide array of mentors, people from all walks of life, people from all levels and experiences in biodiversity informatics. And it's a very open and welcoming group. So regardless of the question, regardless of the concern, there's always somebody there to help out. If they don't know, they're gonna pass your name along to somebody who can help out and make it happen.
I believe to say that a good mentor is someone who is result-oriented, someone who is passion-driven, someone who has a vision of where they want to go, whether in the project that they're doing. I believe that a good mentor is someone who is determined and they are always out there to help the next person, like in whatever circumstance that the next person is in, they make sure that they go even an extra mile to assist that person in whatever they want to achieve.
The benefits for me personally of being involved in the mentoring program are mainly to learn. I'm learning a lot through this program. There are different people involved in very different projects, very diverse, and there's always something to learn about them. We can contribute our own experience in certain topics and fields, but we're always learning.
Very inspiring video indeed, and I could see that there were quite a few questions that were asked during our session. So without further ado, I'm gonna ask a few questions to our other speakers. Thank you very much for this, Mediani. And my first question would be to Tim Hirsch, and it's about the data that seem to be based on natural science. But as we are talking about human development, wouldn't it be important to include anthropological data as well? And maybe also what particular species means to local people, so some cultural point of view or mention of traditional knowledge.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. I think we perhaps just have to be clear that we do have a particular focus on the type of data that essentially pulls together as much information as possible about where species have been found in order to inform and support the kind of research and decisions that I mentioned. So there is undoubtedly a focus on the natural science element, if you like. I think maybe two things I could add to that are that firstly, there is a very significant proportion and volume of data that comes into GBIF, which is from citizens' observations, from volunteer observations. So that way, it certainly involves non-scientists in the bringing together of data. Another aspect is that, for example, several of the projects that were funded through GBIF have focused on, for example, the distribution of plants that are used for traditional medicine or for important species that are important for agriculture and nutrition. So in that way, although the data itself, the species themselves, the information is being collected essentially through projects that are focused on natural science, there is within that data important information about the uses, including cultural uses for those data, which then also helps to focus priorities for conservation to ensure that those species that are important to culture and people can be prioritized in an effective way. So yes, the focus is on natural science, but there is data and information incorporated in some of these projects that do relate to more culture-based information.
And a quick follow-up question that is slightly linked to a question in the chat. As you know, some data from indigenous community can relate to natural science, but also to more, like as you say, to more cultural aspects. For example, a leopard is not only a feline; it's also could be a spirit of a relative. How would you want to elaborate on how we deal with also sharing or not sharing that specific knowledge that is maybe a bit more sensitive?
Yes, well, I mean, again, I think it's important to see perhaps maybe some of the boundaries and the limits as to the type of information that we encourage to be shared openly and freely. And it's absolutely correct that there are particular considerations when it comes to the sharing of knowledge that is derived from indigenous peoples and local communities. And in fact, there is an emerging set of standards known as the CARE principles that are being explored and applied alongside the so-called FAIR principles of which focus on the free access to data, which help organizations like ourselves to understand and to be sensitive to the particular considerations when it comes to the sharing of knowledge that derives from indigenous and local knowledge. So those certainly, I think our whole community is aware of those issues. And so certainly there isn't any sense of forcing everyone to make all information and knowledge freely and openly available, but there are categories of data where we would argue that the free and open access is for the global public good. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. We seem to have lost our moderator here, so I'm going to have to. Yeah, I'll take over. Just I think we've probably only got a couple of minutes left or so. I think Maeva has come back. So sorry, Maeva.
Yeah, sorry about that. It seems that I dropped out for a bit. I just have another question to Laban based on your experience with sharing data. I imagine that it's not easy to convince data holders, the people that have data, to share them openly. How did you manage to convince institutions that have data to share it through GBIF and openly? And what was the concern, and how did you manage to answer the concern?
Thank you. So we have not, in our data, we do not have many data sets from other institutions. They are mainly from individuals at our institute. But those concerns of institutions sharing data are also shared with individuals. And the main response to facilitate data sharing is engaging them and let them know that when they share, they still maintain the ownership. That is one way. So if they become aware that they still have ownership over the data, they are more willing to share. Secondly, we engage them a lot, sensitizing them on the benefits of data sharing. So that is another way that we have been using to make sure that people respond and share their data. Thank you.
Thank you. A quick question to Tim, especially in relation to this European Development Day. Also, what we discussed through the BID program is quite technical, really, and a very specialist field. So could you let us know how this relates to the whole overall topic of the European Development Days, and that is sustainable, Green Deal for a Sustainable Future?
Yes, thank you. And you're right. I think that a lot of the work and the skills training that we provide through BID is extremely technical, and it may seem a little bit distant from those broader aims, but I guess I'd make 2 points. First of all, I think, as I hope we've been able to show just a little bit, the use of the data, once it is shared and brought together, really goes to the heart of many areas of development right across the Sustainable Development Goals that are very much the subject of the Green Deal for nature. So you need both the technical skills and the social arguments and skills to bring networks and people together in the sharing of data in order to contribute to those broader development goals. But the other point I think I would make in terms of development is very much what we've been discussing here in terms of the community of practice, that by identifying the individuals with the potential and the skills, the starting skills, to be able to learn and then continue to practice the sharing and application of data, that in itself is starting to build careers, build opportunities in that growing community of practice, which I think I would argue is also part of the green development process. So it's not people coming in always from outside these regions and passing skills in that way, but it's nurturing and generating a new generation, literally, of experts and data scientists in these regions, which I think we're hopeful and confident is really going to bode well for sustained provision and therefore use and application of data going forward.
Thank you for giving us a bigger context. And a quick question to Laban, if I may. What are your plans now to continue the work that were initiated during your big project? Oh, I'm afraid we don't hear Laban anymore.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. We have big plans for this work. Like I already shared in the presentation, we have made this process institutional. So data mobilization, generation of biodiversity information is now part of our work. And that is because through this process, we reached out to very many institutions, and they are interested in this data on a regular basis. So to maintain this, we are seeking for funding from other institutions, including our own government, and they are promising to continue funding us. So we are not leaving this work. It is now part of us. I also said that we are using the data to develop a freshwater biodiversity data portal. I would like this to be a one-stop center for all biodiversity information in the country. And actually, we now have a picture of how it will look like in like 2050. So the main things we are taking on seriously now is looking for funding to sustain the work and capacity building to make sure that there are always be human resources to maintain this work. Thank you.
Thanks. And as I know, you're also a member of the community of practice that were described by Meliani. I believe you're also yourself a mentor. Would you give us a bit of what is your experience with being part of a wider community of experts?
It is a very good experience because we have people in the community that are always available to support us. Like the previous speaker said, most of the work is technical, requiring prior exposure to some of the tasks. And being in the community of practice helps because you always have people to go to consult. And the community of practice also encourages helping others. So I have been doing this also a lot, guiding the people in my own team, teaching them about all the tasks involved in biodiversity data mobilization, as well as using the data to generate information that can be used to directly support decision making. So the community of practice is a good effort, because I think overall it sustains all these processes and also ensures that there is quality in the data that ends up on the GBIF platform. Thank you.
Yes, and it is really at the most important, right, to be able to share the knowledge and pass it forward. And I just have a last question to Tim, maybe. What would be how do you see the future of the BID programs or the activity initiated under the BID program?
Well, fortunately, we have just started an extension of the original 5-year program. So we've got another 3 years. We're just starting a new series of funded projects in Sub-Saharan Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific, which will go over the next 3 years. We're always hoping to build that up and to grow it in the future. So and we're actively looking for additional funding so that we can, for example, extend this to other regions. I mean, we've mentioned Africa, the Caribbean, the Pacific. GBIF, of course, works in many other regions. And I think what we found through BID is that there is a big demand to extend this kind of approach to many other regions of the world. So I think we would certainly want to widen it. I think we are starting to focus more on the focus of data use, making sure that this data is mobilized for a real purpose with policy and decisions in mind from the start to help to prioritize the mobilization of data. So I think it's building up on that application of data and broadening the regions where we can apply this kind of approach, which would be our priorities for the future.
Thank you. And I think on this last word, we will close that session. Just want to say that it was very, we appreciate the chance to introduce the BID program to all of you. And also that if you have any questions that were not answered or you want to follow additional topics of conversation, you're very welcome to contact us via the link of the session organizer that is under our session description. And we will be very happy to answer those questions and any other queries. So now, on this last word, I will hand back the floor to Angela.